The silk sheets beneath Benita's trembling body still held the warmth of what had just transpired, but the cold realization washing over her was far more devastating than any physical sensation. She stared at the man beside her, his perfectly sculpted chest rising and falling in the aftermath of their passion, and felt her world crumbling. The wedding ring on her finger caught the moonlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse suite, mocking her with its gleaming presence. She had just committed the ultimate betrayal, sleeping with her husband's father, completely unaware that the mysterious, powerful man who had swept her off her feet tonight was not just any stranger, but Kang Junho, the most feared Korean Mafia CEO in Seoul. If you're ready for a story that will leave you questioning everything about love, loyalty, and revenge, then you're in exactly the right place. This is going to be an emotional roller coaster that you won't want to miss a single second of. 3 hours earlier, Benita Williams had been living what she thought was a perfect life. Her marriage to Kang Min-jun, a successful businessman, seemed like a fairy tale. As an African-American woman who had fallen in love with Korean culture and eventually with Min-jun during her graduate studies in Seoul, she believed she had found her happily ever after. Their modern apartment in Gangnam was everything she had dreamed of, and Min-jun's family had welcomed her with what seemed like genuine warmth. But fairy tales, as Benita was about to discover, were nothing more than beautiful lies wrapped in false promises. The first crack in her perfect world appeared when she decided to surprise Min-jun at his office with his favorite takeout from the little restaurant they had visited on their first date. She had spent the morning preparing herself, wanting to look perfect for him. Her dark skin glowed with the skincare routine Min-jun had taught her, incorporating Korean beauty secrets that had become part of their intimate bonding rituals. Her natural hair was styled in elegant braids that Min-jun loved to run his fingers through during their quiet moments together. Benita made her way to his company building, her heart light with anticipation. She had even practiced the Korean phrases she wanted to whisper to him, knowing how much it meant to him when she spoke his language. The elevator ride to the 15th floor felt eternal, but she was buzzing with excitement about seeing the smile on his face when she walked through his office door. That smile never came. Instead, she found herself frozen in the doorway, watching as Min-jun pressed her best friend Sarah against his desk, their mouths locked in a passionate kiss that spoke of familiarity and ongoing betrayal. Sarah's hands were tangled in Min-jun's hair, the same hair Benita had lovingly touched just that morning when she kissed him goodbye. The takeout container slipped from Benita's numb fingers, crashing to the floor with a sound that shattered the illusion of her perfect life. Both Min-jun and Sarah sprang apart, their faces a mixture of shock and guilt that confirmed Benita's worst fears. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a mistake. The way they moved, the way they looked at each other, told the story of a relationship that had been happening right under her nose. "Benita, I can explain," Min-jun started, his voice lacking any real conviction. "How long?" Benita's voice came out as barely a whisper, but the pain behind it was deafening. Sarah, her supposed best friend since college, couldn't even meet her eyes. "Benita, we never meant for this to happen." "How long?" Benita repeated, her voice gaining strength as rage began to replace the initial shock. 6 months, Min-jun admitted, running his hands through his disheveled hair. "But it doesn't mean anything. You're my wife. You're the one I chose." The casual cruelty of his words hit Benita like a physical blow. 6 months. Half a year of lies, of pretending to love her while betraying her with the person she trusted most in the world besides him. All those times Sarah had come over for dinner, all those girls' nights where she had confided her insecurities about being a foreigner in Korea, all those moments when Sarah had comforted her about her struggles with Min-jun's demanding work schedule. Sarah had been playing the role of supportive best friend while secretly stealing her husband's affections. "Get out," Benita said quietly. "Benita, please, let's talk about this rationally." Min-jun approached her with his hands raised as if she were a dangerous animal. "Get out." The words tore from her throat with such force that both Min-jun and Sarah flinched. Benita turned and ran from the office, ignoring Min-jun's calls behind her. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think beyond the overwhelming need to escape. The elevator felt like a cage, trapping her with the scent of Sarah's perfume that still clung to her clothes and the image of their betrayal burned into her retinas. She found herself wandering the streets of Seoul, her tears mixing with the light rain that had begun to fall. Everything she had believed about her life, about the people she loved most, had been a lie. The city that had become her home now felt foreign and hostile, full of whispers in a language she was still learning and pitying looks from strangers who could see her distress. Hours passed as she walked aimlessly, her phone buzzing constantly with calls and messages from both Min-jun and Sarah. She turned it off, needing the silence to process the magnitude of what she had discovered. As the sun began to set, painting the Seoul skyline in shades of orange and pink, Benita found herself in Itaewon, the international district where she had first fallen in love with Korean culture. The familiar sights and sounds provided no comfort now. Every happy memory felt tainted by the knowledge that while she had been building what she thought was a life with Min-jun, he had been building something else entirely with Sarah. That's when she saw him. He was sitting alone at an upscale bar, his presence commanding attention despite his apparent solitude. Even from across the room, Benita could see the power that radiated from him. He was older than the men she usually noticed, probably in his 40s, with silver threading through his jet black hair and lines around his eyes that spoke of experience and perhaps secrets. His suit was impeccably tailored, and everything about him screamed wealth and authority. But it wasn't his obvious affluence that drew her attention. It was the loneliness she recognized in his posture, the way he held his whiskey glass as if it were the only friend he had left in the world. In that moment, she saw a reflection of her own isolation. Before she could second-guess herself, Benita found herself walking toward him. The alcohol she had consumed at 2 previous bars had loosened her inhibitions and dulled the sharp edges of her pain just enough to make her bold. "Is this seat taken?" she asked in Korean, gesturing to the empty barstool beside him. He looked up, and Benita felt her breath catch. Up close, he was even more striking. His dark eyes seemed to see straight through to her soul, and when he smiled, it was both devastatingly handsome and slightly dangerous. "Please," he replied in accented English, recognizing her American origins despite her fluent Korean. "I could use the company." His voice was deep and smooth, with an undertone that suggested he was a man accustomed to being obeyed. Benita slid onto the barstool, suddenly very aware of how she must look after hours of crying and wandering in the rain. "Rough day?" he asked, signaling the bartender for another round. "You could say that," Benita laughed bitterly. "My husband is cheating on me with my best friend. So yes, it's been absolutely wonderful." She expected sympathy or perhaps awkward silence, but instead, the stranger's eyes flashed with something that looked almost like understanding. "Betrayal is a special kind of pain," he said quietly. "It changes you in ways you never expect." There was something in his voice that suggested he spoke from experience. Benita studied his profile as he took a sip of his whiskey, noting the tension in his jaw and the way his fingers gripped the glass. "You sound like you know what you're talking about." "I do." He turned to face her fully, and Benita felt a jolt of attraction that caught her completely off guard. "My name is Junho." "Benita." They shook hands, and the contact sent electricity shooting up her arm. His grip was firm and warm, and he held her hand just a moment longer than necessary before releasing it. "Beautiful name for a beautiful woman," he said, and somehow it didn't sound like a cheesy pickup line. "Though I suspect you don't feel very beautiful right now." His perceptiveness surprised her. "How did you know?" "Because when someone rips your heart out and shows you how little you meant to them, it makes you question everything about yourself. Including your worth." The accuracy of his observation hit her like a physical blow. That was exactly how she felt. Worthless. Used. Disposable. "What do you do when that happens?" she asked, genuinely curious about his answer. Junho's smile turned predatory, and for a moment, Benita glimpsed something dark and dangerous beneath his polished exterior. "You remind yourself of your power. You take back control." Before she could ask what he meant by that, he had signaled the bartender again and was ordering them both another drink. The conversation flowed easily after that, moving from their mutual experiences with betrayal to lighter topics. Junho was incredibly well-traveled and spoke multiple languages fluently. He told her stories about his business ventures, though he was vague about the specifics of what he did for work. Import and export, he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes when she asked directly. Very boring stuff, really. Benita found herself laughing for the first time in what felt like years as he regaled her with tales of business trips gone wrong and cultural misunderstandings. He was charming and attentive, asking about her work as a translator and her experiences adapting to life in Korea. Unlike Min Jun, who had always seemed distracted even during their conversations, Jun-ho gave her his complete attention. As the evening wore on and the alcohol continued to flow, the space between them seemed to shrink. Jun-ho's hand found its way to her knee as he leaned in to hear her better over the bar's music, and Benita didn't pull away. His touch was electric, awakening sensations she hadn't felt in months. Min Jun had become increasingly distant in recent weeks, and now she understood why. He had been getting his needs met elsewhere. I should probably go home, Benita said eventually, though she made no move to leave. Should you? Jun-ho's voice was low and intimate. To an empty apartment where you'll do nothing but replay what you saw today and torture yourself with questions that have no good answers. He was right, and they both knew it. The thought of returning to the space she had shared with Min Jun, surrounded by reminders of their life together, was unbearable. I have a penthouse nearby, Jun-ho continued, his thumb tracing small circles on her knee. With an incredible view of the city. Sometimes changing your perspective helps you see things more clearly. Benita knew exactly what he was offering, and she knew exactly why she was going to say yes. It wasn't just about revenge against Min Jun, though that was certainly part of it. It was about reclaiming her power, her sexuality, her right to be desired by someone who actually wanted her. Show me, she whispered. The ride to his penthouse was charged with sexual tension. Jun-ho's chauffeur-driven Mercedes was luxurious beyond anything Benita had experienced, with leather seats that probably cost more than her monthly salary and a sound system that filled the space with soft jazz. Jun-ho sat close enough that she could smell his cologne, a sophisticated blend that was nothing like the drugstore scents Min Jun favored. His penthouse was breathtaking, occupying the entire top floor of one of Seoul's most exclusive buildings. Floor-to-ceiling windows provided a panoramic view of the city lights, and the interior was decorated with a mixture of modern Korean aesthetics and obviously expensive international pieces. Drink? Jun-ho asked, moving to a bar that looked like it had been lifted from a five-star hotel. Please. He poured them both glasses of wine that probably cost more than Benita made in a week, and they stood at the windows looking out over Seoul. The city spread below them like a glittering carpet, and for a moment, Benita felt like she was floating above all her problems. How do you afford all this? She asked, gesturing at the obvious wealth surrounding them. Jun-ho's smile was enigmatic. I'm very good at what I do. Before she could pursue that line of questioning, he had moved behind her, his hands settling on her shoulders. Benita could feel the heat of his body through the thin fabric of her dress, and when he began to massage the tension from her neck and shoulders, she couldn't suppress a small moan of pleasure. You're wound so tight, he murmured against her ear, his breath sending shivers down her spine. It's been a stressful day, she managed to say, though her voice was breathy and weak. His hands moved lower, skimming down her arms and back up again in a touch that was both soothing and arousing. Let me help you forget. When Benita turned in his arms, she could see her own desire reflected in his dark eyes. There was a moment of hesitation, a final opportunity to walk away and remain faithful to her cheating husband. But then she thought of Min Jun's hands on Sarah, of the months of lies and deception, of the casual way he had dismissed their marriage as meaningless. Make me forget everything, she whispered against Jun-ho's lips before kissing him with a passion that surprised them both. If you're loving this intense drama as much as I am, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss these incredible stories. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next. What followed was the most intense night of Benita's life. Jun-ho made love to her with a skill and attention that made her realize how much she had been settling for in her marriage. He worshipped her body as if she were a goddess, taking his time to explore every curve and hollow with his hands and mouth until she was trembling with need. When he finally joined with her, it was with a passion that felt almost desperate, as if they were both trying to lose themselves in each other. They made love multiple times throughout the night, sometimes tender and slow, other times urgent and almost violent in their need for each other. Junho seemed to understand exactly what she needed without her having to ask, and Benita found herself responding to him in ways she never had with Min-jun. It was only in the aftermath, as they lay tangled in his expensive sheets with the Seoul skyline glittering beyond the windows, that reality began to creep back in. Benita stared at her wedding ring, still gleaming on her finger despite everything that had happened. Regrets? Junho asked softly, following her gaze. I don't know, Benita answered honestly. Should I have them? That depends on what you want to do next. Before she could ask what he meant, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. Junho glanced at it and frowned, his entire demeanor shifting in an instant from satisfied lover to something much harder and more dangerous. I have to take this, he said, already moving away from her and reaching for his robe. Benita watched him walk to the far end of the room before answering, speaking in rapid Korean that was too quick and too quietly spoken for her to follow. But she caught enough words to understand that whatever business he was discussing was serious and potentially dangerous. When he hung up and returned to bed, his expression was troubled. Everything okay? Benita asked. Business complications, he said dismissively, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. They dozed fitfully for a few hours, and when Benita woke, pale morning light was filtering through the windows. Junho was already awake, staring at his phone with an expression that made her blood run cold. What is it? She asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. He showed her the screen, and Benita's world tilted off its axis for the second time in 24 hours. It was a news article about a business merger, complete with photos of the key players. And there, smiling confidently at the camera in what was obviously a family photo, were Junho and Min-jun. Father and son. The phone slipped from her numb fingers as the full magnitude of what she had done crashed over her. She had just spent the night having passionate sex with her husband's father. The man she had poured her heart out to about Min-jun's betrayal was Min-jun's own father. You knew, she whispered, her voice hollow with shock. Junho's expression was carefully neutral. I suspected when you mentioned your husband's name during our conversation last night. And you said nothing? Benita scrambled out of bed, suddenly desperate to put distance between them. Would it have changed anything? His voice was calm, almost clinical. You were already betrayed. You were already hurting. You were already looking for a way to take back your power. This is sick, Benita said, grabbing her clothes from the floor and pulling them on with shaking hands. This is twisted and wrong, Anne. And effective, Junho interrupted. Min-jun took something precious from you. Now you've taken something from him. The casual way he spoke about it, as if this were just another business transaction, made Benita's stomach turn. You used me. We used each other, he corrected. And we both got what we needed. Benita fled the penthouse without another word, her mind reeling as she tried to process what had happened. The elevator ride down felt like a descent into hell, and by the time she reached the street, she was hyperventilating. She had to get home. She had to think. She had to figure out what to do with the knowledge that she had just committed an act of betrayal so profound that it would destroy not just her marriage, but potentially an entire family. The apartment she shared with Min-jun felt like a crime scene when she walked through the door. Every surface, every piece of furniture, every photograph seemed to mock her with memories of the life she had thought they were building together. Min-jun wasn't there, probably still at Sarah's place or maybe back at his office, but his presence lingered in everything from the coffee cup he had left in the sink to the book he had been reading that was still open on the nightstand. Benita sat on their bed, the same bed where they had made love just 2 nights ago, and tried to make sense of the chaos her life had become. In the span of 18 hours, she had discovered her husband's affair, slept with his father, and learned that the man who had comforted her in her darkest moment had been playing a game she didn't even know existed. Her phone, which she had finally turned back on during the taxi ride home, was full of increasingly frantic messages from Min-jun. The progression from casual concern to genuine panic painted a picture of a man who had realized exactly how badly he had messed up. "Baby, where are you? I'm worried. Benita, please come home so we can talk. I know you're upset, but running away isn't going to solve anything. Sarah told me she saw you leaving with some man. Please tell me you didn't do anything stupid." The irony of that last message almost made her laugh. If only he knew just how stupid the thing she had done actually was. Benita was still staring at her phone when she heard Min Jun's key in the door. She had been dreading this moment, but now that it was here, she found herself oddly calm. Maybe it was shock, or maybe it was the knowledge that whatever happened next, she now held cards in this game that Min Jun couldn't even imagine. "Benita?" Min Jun's voice echoed through the apartment, cautious and uncertain. "In here," she called from the bedroom. He appeared in the doorway looking haggard and worried, his usually perfect appearance disheveled in a way that suggested he hadn't slept. When he saw her sitting calmly on the bed, relief flooded his features. "Thank God you're okay. I was so worried when you didn't come home last night." "Were you?" Benita's voice was steady, betraying none of the turmoil raging inside her. "Or were you just worried that I might do exactly what you've been doing for the past 6 months? Min Jun flinched at the accusation. "Benita, what happened with Sarah, it's complicated." "No, it's really not." Benita stood up, facing him with a composure that seemed to unnerve him. "You made a choice to betray our marriage. You made that choice every day for 6 months. There's nothing complicated about that." "I love you," Min Jun said desperately. "What happened with Sarah doesn't change that. You're my wife. You're the woman I want to spend my life with. And yet you've been spending your body with someone else." The crude accuracy of her statement made Min Jun wince. "It was just sex, Benita. It didn't mean anything." "Just sex," Benita repeated thoughtfully. "So if I had just sex with someone else, that would be okay? As long as it didn't mean anything?" "That's different." "How?" Min Jun struggled for an answer that didn't make him sound like a hypocrite. Because you're my wife. Because I trust you to be better than that." The breathtaking arrogance of his response almost broke through Benita's carefully maintained calm. He had betrayed her in the worst possible way, but he still expected her to be faithful to him. He still believed that he deserved her loyalty while giving none in return. "Your trust," she said slowly. "How interesting. Tell me, Min Jun, what else should I know about your family's business dealings?" The question caught him off guard. "What are you talking about?" "Your father's import and export business. What exactly does he import and export?" The color drained from Min Jun's face, and Benita knew she had hit a nerve. Why are you asking about my father?" "Because I met him last night." The silence that followed was deafening. Min Jun stared at her as if she had just spoken in a foreign language, his mouth opening and closing without any words emerging. "You, what?" "I met your father last night. Jun Ho. Charming man. Very good listener. He had some fascinating insights about betrayal and how it changes people." "Benita, please tell me you didn't." "Didn't what?" Her voice was sweet poison. "Didn't do exactly what you've been doing for the past 6 months. Didn't seek comfort in someone else's arms when my spouse betrayed me. You slept with my father." The words came out as barely a whisper, but the horror in them was unmistakable. "I did." Benita's calm admission hit Min Jun like a physical blow. "Multiple times, actually. He's very thorough." Min Jun staggered backward as if she had struck him, his face cycling through shock, disgust, and rage in rapid succession. "You're lying." "Am I?" Benita pulled out her phone and showed him a selfie she had taken in Junho's bathroom mirror that morning, her hair tousled and her lips swollen from kissing, with enough of the expensive penthouse visible in the background to confirm her story. The photo hit Min Jun like a sledgehammer. He doubled over as if in physical pain, one hand pressed to his stomach while the other gripped the doorframe for support. "How could you?" he gasped. The same way you could spend 6 months fucking my best friend, I imagine. Benita's voice remained steady, but there was steel beneath the calm. The same way you could lie to my face every single day while pretending to be a devoted husband. That's different. Sarah isn't, she's not my father. No, she's just the person I trusted most in the world besides you. But I suppose family loyalty is more important than marriage vows in your value system. Minjun straightened, his shock giving way to anger. You sick, twisted. Careful, Benita interrupted. You might say something you can't take back. Something that would make it very difficult for us to work through this like the mature adults we supposedly are. The threat in her voice stopped Minjun cold. He stared at her as if seeing her for the first time, this calm, controlled woman who bore little resemblance to the tearful wife who had discovered his affair yesterday. What do you want? He asked quietly. I want you to understand something, Benita replied. You don't get to be the victim here. You don't get to be outraged or hurt or betrayed. You gave up those rights when you chose to cheat on me. So this is revenge. This is consequences. She moved closer to him, and he actually took a step back. You taught me that marriage vows are just suggestions. That fidelity is optional. That the person who loves you most can be discarded whenever something more appealing comes along. I'm a very good student, Minjun. I learn fast. The conversation was interrupted by the buzzing of Minjun's phone. He glanced at it and went pale. It's my father, he said, his voice hollow. You should probably answer that. Minjun's hands shook as he accepted the call, putting it on speaker with a look that begged Benita not to say anything that would make this worse than it already was. Minjun. Junho's voice filled the room, calm and controlled as always. I think we need to have a family meeting. Bring Benita. Father, I. Bring Benita, Junho repeated, and there was something in his tone that suggested this wasn't a request. 1 hour. You know where. The call ended, leaving Minjun and Benita staring at each other in tense silence. What kind of family meeting? Benita asked. The kind where people disappear, Minjun said quietly. Benita, you don't understand what you've gotten yourself into. My father isn't just a businessman. He's dangerous. Dangerous how? Minjun ran his hands through his hair, his composure finally cracking completely. He's the head of one of Seoul's most powerful crime families. The import and export business is just a front. His real business involves things that would land him in prison for life if the authorities could prove it. The room seemed to tilt around Benita as the final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. The expensive penthouse, the armed driver, the phone call that had made Junho's entire demeanor shift, the way people in the bar had given him a wide berth despite his magnetic presence. She hadn't just slept with her husband's father. She had slept with a Korean Mafia boss. And you've just dragged both of us into the middle of a situation that could get us killed, Minjun continued, his voice rising with panic. Do you have any idea what you've done? Before Benita could respond, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, where something beautiful. Tonight changes everything. Jay. She showed the message to Minjun, and he actually whimpered. We have to run, he said frantically. We have to leave the country right now, before. Before what? Benita interrupted. Before your father decides that I know too much about his business. Before he decides that you're a liability because you can't control your wife. Or before he decides that we're both expendable. The questions hung in the air between them, each one more terrifying than the last. Minjun sank onto the bed beside her, his head in his hands. This is all my fault, he said quietly. If I hadn't cheated, if I had just been a better husband, none of this would have happened. No, Benita said firmly. This happened because you made a choice to betray me. What I did last night was my choice. And whatever happens next will be the result of all our choices. She stood up and moved to their closet, pulling out a black dress that she had bought for their anniversary dinner but never worn because Minjun had cancelled at the last minute to spend the evening with Sarah. What are you doing? Getting dressed for our family meeting, Benita replied, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. Because running isn't an option. Your father has resources we can't imagine and connections we can't escape. The only way out of this is through it. Benita, please, Minjun begged. You don't understand what he's capable of. Then explain it to me. Minjun was quiet for a long moment, gathering his thoughts or perhaps his courage. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. My father built his empire by being smarter and more ruthless than everyone around him. People who cross him don't just disappear, they disappear in ways that send messages to anyone else who might be thinking of crossing him. I've spent my entire life trying to stay out of that world, trying to build something legitimate and clean. And yet you still work in the family business. The legitimate parts of it, Minjun insisted. The construction company, the restaurants, the real import businesses. I've never been involved in the other things. What other things? Minjun looked at her with haunted eyes. Things you don't want to know about. Things that would give you nightmares for the rest of your life, however long that might be. As Benita applied her makeup, she found herself thinking about the man she had spent the night with. Junho had been charming and attentive, passionate and skilled, but underneath it all, there had been something else. A coldness that she had mistaken for sophistication. A control that she had found attractive but which now seemed sinister. Did he know? She asked suddenly. When he approached me at the bar, did he already know who I was? Minjun was quiet for so long that Benita turned to look at him. His expression confirmed her worst fears before he even spoke. Probably, he admitted. Father has people watching all of his family members. For security reasons, he claims, but really it's about control. If you were upset enough to spend hours drinking alone in Itaewon, his people would have reported it. So he orchestrated the whole thing. Most likely. The realization should have made Benita angry, but instead, she felt oddly calm. She had been a pawn in someone else's game from the beginning, manipulated by both the man she had married and the man she had slept with. But pawns could become queens if they survived long enough to reach the other side of the board. Then we play the game better than he expects, she said, applying her lipstick with steady hands. What do you mean? I mean that your father isn't the only one who can use people to get what they want. He wanted to hurt you by using me. Fine. But he also showed me exactly how little regard he has for women like me. He thinks I'm just another pawn to be moved around his chessboard. Aren't you? Benita turned to face Minjun, and he recoiled from the dangerous glint in her eyes. Not anymore. The drive to Junho's private office took them through parts of Seoul that Benita had never seen before. The gleaming skyscrapers and trendy neighborhoods gave way to older, grittier areas where the buildings were lower and the shadows seemed deeper. Minjun grew more tense with every mile, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles were white. Remember, he said for the third time, don't say anything unless he asks you directly. Don't volunteer information. Don't try to be clever or sarcastic. Just answer his questions and let me handle everything else. And if he decides to handle us the way he handles other problems, then we hope we die quickly. The building they eventually stopped at looked innocuous enough from the outside, a mid-rise office complex that could have housed any number of legitimate businesses. But Benita noticed the security cameras positioned at every possible angle and the men in expensive suits who seemed to be loitering with no particular purpose except to watch who came and went. Inside, they were escorted by two large men who said nothing but radiated menace with every step. The elevator ride to the top floor was silent except for the soft jazz playing through hidden speakers, an incongruously cheerful soundtrack for what felt like a journey to their doom. Junho's office was a study in contrasts. Traditional Korean artwork hung beside modern abstract paintings. An antique tea set sat on a glass desk that probably cost more than most people's cars. Floor-to-ceiling windows provided a panoramic view of the city, but the glass was clearly bulletproof and the blinds were positioned to prevent anyone from seeing inside. Junho himself was seated behind his desk, looking every inch the successful businessman in his perfectly tailored suit. If Benita hadn't known about their night together, if she hadn't seen him naked and vulnerable in the aftermath of passion, she might have been fooled by the image he projected. But now she could see the predator beneath the polish. Min-jun, Benita. He greeted them with the same calm courtesy he might have shown any business associates. Please, sit. The chairs positioned in front of his desk were comfortable but positioned slightly lower than his own, a subtle power play that put visitors at a disadvantage. Benita sat with her back straight and her hands folded in her lap, projecting a confidence she was far from feeling. I suppose you're wondering why I asked you both here, Junho began, his tone conversational. Father, about last night, Min-jun started, but Junho held up a hand to silence him. Last night was illuminating in many ways, he continued. It revealed several truths that I think we need to discuss openly. His eyes moved to Benita, and she felt that same dangerous attraction that had drawn her to him in the bar. Even knowing what he was, even knowing that he had manipulated her, her body still responded to his presence. The first truth, Junho said, is that my son is a fool who doesn't appreciate what he has. Min-jun's face flushed red, but he said nothing. The second truth is that Benita is far more interesting than any of us realized. Interesting how? Benita asked, ignoring Min-jun's panicked look. Junho smiled, and it was the same smile that had charmed her in the bar, equal parts seductive and threatening. Most women in your situation would be hysterical by now. Crying, begging for forgiveness, making promises they couldn't keep. But you're sitting there like you're at a business meeting, calculating your next move. Maybe I'm just in shock. Maybe. Or maybe you're exactly what this family needs. The comment sent a chill down Benita's spine. What do you mean? Instead of answering directly, Junho stood and moved to the windows, looking out over the city he controlled through fear and violence. Min-jun has always been weak, he said matter-of-factly, as if discussing the weather. Too soft for the family business, too principled for the realities of our world. I had hoped that marriage might strengthen him, give him something worth fighting for. I tried to be a good husband, Min-jun protested weakly. You tried to live in a fantasy, Junho corrected. You thought you could have a normal life, a normal marriage, normal problems. But normal people don't have fathers like me. He turned back to face them, and Benita saw something in his expression that made her blood run cold. Which brings us to the third truth that last night revealed, he continued. My son's marriage is over. Father, please, Min-jun said desperately. We can work through this. Benita and I can rebuild. With what? Junho's voice cracked like a whip. Trust. Respect. Love. You destroyed all of those things when you decided to betray your wife with her best friend. But you slept with her. Min-jun's voice rose to almost a shout. You're my father. I'm also a man who recognizes an opportunity when he sees one, Junho replied calmly. Your wife came to me broken and seeking revenge. I simply provided her with the tools she needed. Tools for what? For becoming who she was always meant to be. The conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door. One of the large men who had escorted them upstairs entered and whispered something in Junho's ear that made his expression darken. Excuse me for a moment, he said, moving to his desk and picking up a phone. The conversation that followed was in rapid Korean, too fast for Benita to follow completely, but she caught enough words to understand that something had gone wrong with one of his business operations. Someone had betrayed him, someone was going to pay, and the consequences were going to be severe. When he hung up, his entire demeanor had shifted. The charming businessman was gone, replaced by something much darker and more dangerous. It seems we have a more pressing matter to discuss, he said, his voice deadly quiet. Someone has been feeding information about our operations to the police. Someone close to the family. Min-jun went pale. Father, you can't think that I... No, Junho interrupted. You're too weak to betray me, and too stupid to do it successfully. But someone has been talking, and the timing is very interesting. His eyes moved to Benita, and she felt the weight of his suspicion like a physical force. You think I'm a police informant? She asked, unable to keep the disbelief out of her voice. I think you're a woman with nothing left to lose who appeared in my son's life at a very convenient time for anyone wanting to get close to this family. The accusation hung in the air between them like a loaded gun. Benita realized that this entire meeting had been a setup, a way for Junho to gauge her reactions and determine if she was a threat to his organization. If I were working for the police, she said carefully, don't you think they would have arrested you already? I've been in your penthouse, in your bed, in your most private spaces. If I were recording conversations or gathering evidence, wouldn't they have acted by now? Maybe you're not working for the Korean police, Junho mused. Maybe you're working for someone else. The Americans, perhaps. The FBI has been very interested in Korean organized crime lately. You're paranoid. I'm alive, he corrected. In my business, the paranoid ones are the only ones who survive. The tension in the room was suffocating. Min Jun looked like he was about to have a panic attack, and Benita could feel Junho's suspicion wrapping around her like a noose. She needed to do something to shift the dynamic, to prove her loyalty or at least create enough doubt to keep them all alive. If you really think I'm working against you, she said slowly, then you have a problem. How so? Because if I am what you think I am, then I already know enough to destroy you. Which means you have two choices, trust me, or kill me. And if you kill me, you'll never know for sure whether I was really a threat or just a woman who got caught up in your family's dysfunction. The boldness of her statement seemed to surprise Junho. He studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes searching her face for any sign of deception. And if I choose to trust you? Then you get something much more valuable than another victim, Benita replied. You get an ally who understands exactly how dangerous this world is and who has every reason to want to survive in it. What makes you think I need allies? Because someone close to you is feeding information to your enemies, and you don't know who it is. Because your son is too weak to help you and too much of a liability to ignore. Because you're getting older and the younger wolves are starting to circle, waiting for you to show any sign of weakness. The accuracy of her observations seemed to strike a nerve. Junho's jaw tightened, and for a moment, Benita thought she might have pushed too hard. But then his expression shifted, and she saw something that might have been respect in his eyes. You're either very brave or very stupid, he said finally. Maybe both, Benita admitted. But I'm also right. Junho was quiet for a long moment, weighing his options. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful rather than threatening. There is a way you could prove your loyalty, he said slowly. How? By helping me identify the person who's been betraying us. I don't know anything about your business operations. No, but you know people. You're a translator, which means you're good at reading between the lines, understanding subtext, picking up on things that others might miss. Benita felt a chill of understanding. You want me to spy on your own people. I want you to observe them. Listen to their conversations, watch their behavior, report back to me about anything that seems unusual or suspicious. And if I say no? Junho's smile was cold as winter. Then we'll have to assume that your reluctance to help stems from divided loyalties. It wasn't really a choice, and they all knew it. Benita looked at Min Jun, who was staring at his hands with the expression of a man watching his world collapse around him. He had brought this on all of them with his infidelity, but she was the one being asked to pay the price. What exactly would you want me to do? She asked. Attend family gatherings. Social events. Business dinners. Be my son's wife in public while you help me protect this family from its enemies. And in private? The question hung between them, loaded with implications that made Min Jun flinch visibly. In private, Junho said carefully, you would continue to be exactly what you were last night. A woman who understands the value of strategic relationships. The euphemism didn't disguise what he was really asking. He wanted her to continue sleeping with him while pretending to be married to his son. He wanted to use her as both a spy and a mistress while Min Jun played the role of the unknowing cuckold. That's sick, Min Jun said quietly, finally finding his voice. That's survival, Junho corrected. And it's the only option I'm offering. Benita looked between father and son, seeing her future stretched out before her in all its twisted complexity. She could refuse and almost certainly die. She could agree and become a permanent prisoner in a web of lies and manipulation. Or she could find a third option, one that none of them saw coming. "I'll do it," she said finally, and watched relief flood Minjun's features. "But I have conditions." Junho raised an eyebrow. "You're hardly in a position to negotiate." "Aren't I?" Benita stood and moved to the windows, mimicking his earlier power play. "You need me more than I need you, or you would have had me killed already instead of trying to recruit me. Explain." "You're facing a crisis of loyalty within your organization, and you don't know who to trust. Your son is weak and compromised. Your enemies are getting bolder and your allies are getting nervous. In that situation, having someone on your side who has nothing to lose and everything to gain isn't just useful, it's essential." She turned to face him, and saw that she had his full attention. "So yes, I'll be your spy. I'll attend your family gatherings and business dinners. I'll smile and play the role of the devoted daughter-in-law while I listen for information that might help you identify your enemies. And my other requirements? We'll discuss those privately. But I want Minjun to understand that his role in this arrangement is purely ceremonial. Our marriage is over in everything but name." Minjun's face crumpled, but he said nothing. He knew that any protest would only make things worse for all of them. "Very well," Junho said after a moment. "I'll have my lawyer draw up the necessary agreements." "Agreements? Did you think this would be a handshake deal?" His smile was sharp as a knife. "Everything will be documented, Benita. Your responsibilities, your compensation, the consequences of betrayal. In my business, we believe in putting things in writing." As if summoned by his words, one of the large men entered the office carrying a leather portfolio. He placed it on Junho's desk and retreated without a word. "Preliminary contracts," Junho explained, opening the portfolio to reveal several thick documents. "I had them prepared while we were talking." The efficiency of it was terrifying. He had anticipated her agreement, planned for her capitulation, prepared for her enslavement with the cold precision of a predator who had done this many times before. But as Benita moved closer to look at the contracts, she noticed something that Junho probably thought she was too scared to catch. The signature lines weren't just for her, they were for someone else as well. Someone whose involvement in this arrangement he hadn't mentioned. "Who else is signing these?" she asked. Junho's smile widened. "Why don't you ask her yourself?" The office door opened, and Benita's world tilted on its axis for the third time in 2 days. Sarah walked in, looking perfectly composed and utterly unsurprised to see them there. "Hello, Benita," she said with a smile that was equal parts apologetic and triumphant. "I think it's time we all had an honest conversation. And there it is, everyone. Just when you thought this story couldn't get any more twisted, we've got another major revelation. Make sure you're subscribed because this roller coaster is far from over, and I promise you, the next part is going to blow your mind." The sight of Sarah walking into Junho's office as if she belonged there sent Benita's mind reeling. Her former best friend looked completely at ease, dressed in an expensive suit that Benita had never seen before and carrying herself with a confidence that spoke of familiarity with these surroundings. "Sarah?" Minjun's voice was barely a whisper. "What are you doing here?" Playing her role, Junho answered before Sarah could speak. "Just as she has been for the past year." The implications of his words hit Benita like a physical blow. "A year? But you said the affair had only been going on for 6 months. "The affair has been going on for 6 months, Sarah confirmed, taking a seat as if this were a casual business meeting. "But my employment with Mr. Kong began much earlier than that." "Employment?" Benita stared at the woman she had considered her closest friend, trying to reconcile this stranger with the person who had held her while she cried over her struggles with adapting to Korean culture. "Sarah has been very useful to me," Junho explained. "As your friend, she had access to information about my son's marriage, his habits, his weaknesses. Information that has proven quite valuable. You've been spying on us this entire time. Min Jun's voice rose with incredulous anger. I've been protecting family interests, Sarah replied coolly. Your father needed to know if you were truly committed to the family business or if your marriage to an outsider was making you soft. And what was your conclusion? Benita asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. That Min Jun was becoming a liability, Sarah said matter-of-factly. Too sentimental, too concerned with maintaining a normal life, too willing to distance himself from the family's core operations. The affair was designed to accelerate that process. The casual cruelty of it took Benita's breath away. You seduced him to destroy our marriage? I seduced him because it was my job, Sarah corrected. And because it was surprisingly easy. He was so hungry for someone who understood his world, someone who didn't ask uncomfortable questions about where his money came from or why he worked such odd hours. Min Jun looked like he had been gutted. You never cared about me at all. I cared about the mission, Sarah replied. Personal feelings were irrelevant. But why? Benita demanded. Why go to such elaborate lengths to destroy our marriage? If Min Jun was becoming a problem for the family business, why not just handle it more directly? Junho's smile was cold as winter. Because my son, for all his weaknesses, is still my son. I don't kill family members unless absolutely necessary. But I do neutralize threats to the organization, even when those threats come from within. So you orchestrated all of this, Benita said, the full scope of the manipulation becoming clear. Sarah's friendship with me, her affair with Min Jun, my discovery of their betrayal, our meeting at the bar. I orchestrated opportunities, Junho corrected. The choices you all made were your own. Bullshit. The word came out harsh and bitter. You manipulated us like puppets. I presented you with situations and let you reveal your true natures, he replied calmly. Min Jun revealed that he was weak and selfish. Sarah revealed that she was ambitious and pragmatic. And you? What did I reveal? That you're exactly what this family needs. Before Benita could ask what he meant by that, Sarah spoke up. The contracts aren't just for you, Benita. They're for both of us. Benita looked down at the documents again, this time noticing details she had missed in her shock. There were indeed signature lines for both her and Sarah, with clauses that outlined their respective roles in what was essentially an elaborate deception. You want us to work together. The idea was so absurd that Benita almost laughed. I want you to complement each other, Junho said. Sarah knows the family business inside and out. She understands the players, the politics, the unspoken rules. But she's also compromised now, too many people know about her relationship with Min Jun for her to be as effective as she once was. And me? You're a fresh face. An outsider who married into the family for love, not ambition. People will trust you in ways they never trusted Sarah. People will trust me to do what? To help me identify the traitor in our organization, Junho said simply. Someone has been feeding information to law enforcement. Someone with access to high-level family meetings and strategic planning sessions. Someone who knows enough about our operations to cause serious damage. And you think having 2 women spy on your people will solve that problem? I think having 2 women who understand the consequences of betrayal will be very motivated to succeed. The threat underlying his words was unmistakable. Failure wasn't an option, and the consequences of disappointing him would be severe. What happens to Min Jun in all this? Benita asked. Min Jun will continue to play his role as your husband and my son, Junho replied. But his real function will be as a cover story for your activities. No one will suspect his wife and his mistress of working together to investigate the family. The twisted logic of it was almost admirable in its complexity. Min Jun would be humiliated but alive, serving as unwitting camouflage for an operation designed to root out disloyalty within his father's criminal organization. I need to think about this, Benita said finally. I'm afraid that's not an option, Junho replied. The situation is too urgent for extended deliberation. You sign now, or you become a liability that needs to be eliminated. The finality in his voice left no room for argument. Benita looked at Sarah, who was watching her with an expression that might have been sympathy if it weren't coming from someone who had betrayed her so completely. "If I do this," Benita said slowly, "what guarantee do I have that you won't eliminate me once I've outlived my usefulness?" "The same guarantee anyone in this business has," Junho replied. "Success breeds security. Make yourself indispensable, and you'll find that your continued existence becomes a priority. And if I refuse? Then you'll join the long list of people who underestimated the consequences of crossing this family." Benita picked up the pen that had been placed beside the contracts, weighing it in her hand as if it were a weapon rather than a simple writing instrument. In many ways, it was both. Her signature would be the ammunition used to fire her old life into oblivion, but it might also be the weapon she could eventually use to destroy the people who had manipulated her into this position. "Before I sign," she said, "I want to know one thing." "What? Was any of it real? Your attraction to me, the way you made love to me, the connection I thought we had?" For the first time since she had learned his true identity, Junho's carefully controlled expression faltered slightly. Something that might have been genuine emotion flickered across his features before being quickly suppressed. "Some things are more complex than they appear," he said quietly. It wasn't the answer she had hoped for, but it was more honest than she had expected. Benita signed her name with quick, decisive strokes, committing herself to a path she couldn't fully see but knowing that it was the only way forward. Sarah signed next, her signature flowing and confident as if she were signing a routine business document rather than agreeing to an elaborate deception that could get them all killed. "Excellent," Junho said, gathering the contracts and placing them back in the leather portfolio. "Your first assignment begins tonight." "Tonight?" "There's a family gathering to celebrate the success of one of our recent business ventures. All the key players will be there, including several people who have access to the information that's been leaked. It will be the perfect opportunity for you to begin your observations." "What exactly are we supposed to be looking for?" Sarah asked. "Anything unusual. People who seem nervous, conversations that stop when you approach, phone calls that are taken privately. Trust your instincts, if something feels wrong, it probably is." Junho stood and moved to a safe hidden behind one of the traditional paintings on his wall. From it, he removed two small devices that looked like expensive jewelry. "Communication devices," he explained, handing one to each woman. "They look like decorative pins, but they're actually sophisticated recording and transmission equipment. Anything you say while wearing them will be heard by my security team. So we'll be under surveillance while we're conducting surveillance," Benita observed. "Consider it quality assurance," Junho replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. As they prepared to leave, Minjun finally found his voice again. "Father, what am I supposed to do while they're working together?" "You're supposed to play the role of the devoted son and husband," Junho replied. "Smile, make small talk, and try not to do anything that makes this family look weak." The dismissal in his tone was crushing. Minjun had gone from golden son to irrelevant prop in the span of a single conversation, and everyone in the room knew it. "And after tonight?" Benita asked as they reached the door. "After tonight, we see how well you perform under pressure," Junho replied. "Success will lead to additional opportunities. Failure." He didn't need to finish the sentence. They all understood the stakes. As they rode the elevator down to the ground floor, the three of them stood in silence, each lost in their own thoughts about how dramatically their lives had changed. When they reached the parking garage, Sarah finally spoke. "I know you hate me," she said to Benita. "And you have every right to. But if we're going to survive this, we need to work together." "Work together?" Benita's voice was sharp with anger. "You destroyed my marriage, betrayed my trust, and manipulated me into becoming part of some criminal enterprise. And now you want to be partners?" "I want us both to stay alive," Sarah replied bluntly. "Because whatever you think of me personally, I know how this world works. And I know what happens to people who disappoint Junho. What happens? They disappear. Completely. No bodies, no evidence, no closure for the families who wonder what happened to them. The stark brutality of it sent a chill down Benita's spine. She looked at Min Jun, who was leaning against his car with the expression of a man who had lost everything. "Are you going to be okay?" she asked him. "No," he replied honestly. "But I'll survive. We all will, as long as we do exactly what my father wants." As they drove home to prepare for the evening's gathering, Benita found herself thinking about the strange turn her life had taken. 48 hours ago, she had been a happily married woman with a job she loved and a future she was excited about. Now she was essentially a spy for the Korean Mafia, bound by contracts that made her a prisoner of circumstances she never could have imagined. But as terrifying as her situation was, she also felt something she hadn't expected, a sense of purpose. For the first time in her marriage, she wasn't just Min Jun's wife or an outsider trying to fit into Korean society. She was a player in a game that mattered, with skills that were valued and a role that was essential. The question was whether she could play the game well enough to survive it, and whether she could find a way to turn the tables on the people who had manipulated her into playing it in the first place. The family gathering was being held at an exclusive restaurant that Junho owned, the kind of place where reservations were impossible to get unless you knew the right people or had the right connections. As Benita and Min Jun arrived, she could see armed security positioned discreetly around the perimeter and noticed that every server and staff member moved with the kind of precision that suggested military training. Inside, the atmosphere was one of subdued celebration. Expensive suits and designer dresses filled the private dining room, and conversations were conducted in the kind of hushed tones that suggested serious business disguised as social pleasure. Junho greeted them at the door, playing the role of gracious host and devoted father perfectly. To any outside observer, he was simply a successful businessman celebrating with family and close associates. Only Benita and the other people in the room who knew the truth could see the predator beneath the polished exterior. "Benita," he said warmly, taking her hand and kissing her cheek in a gesture that seemed paternal but sent electricity shooting through her body. "You look beautiful tonight." The black dress she had chosen fit her perfectly, elegant enough for the occasion but not so formal as to attract unwanted attention. The communication device Junho had given her was pinned to her lapel like an expensive brooch, its sophisticated technology hidden behind a facade of simple jewelry. Sarah arrived shortly after them, playing the role of Min Jun's girlfriend with an ease that suggested she had done this many times before. She greeted Benita with an air kiss and a smile that would have seemed genuine to anyone who didn't know the truth about their relationship. "It's so good to see you," she said, her voice warm with false affection. "I've missed our girls' nights." The casual cruelty of the comment, referencing their old friendship as if it were something that could be resumed rather than something that had been destroyed by betrayal, made Benita's jaw clench. But she forced herself to smile and play along. "We should definitely catch up soon," she replied, matching Sarah's fake warmth with her own. As the evening progressed, Benita found herself studying the other guests with new eyes. These weren't just successful businesspeople and their families, they were the inner circle of a criminal organization, each one playing their part in an elaborate performance designed to disguise illegal activities behind a facade of legitimate success. She recognized some faces from news articles about Korean business leaders, people who were regularly featured in financial magazines and society pages. The cognitive dissonance of seeing them in this context was jarring, pillars of the community who were apparently also involved in activities that would land them in prison for life if the authorities could prove their involvement. "Overwhelming, isn't it?" Sarah appeared at her elbow, following her gaze across the room. "Which part?" "Realizing that nothing is what it seems. That the successful, respectable people you read about in newspapers are actually criminals hiding in plain sight. Is that what you thought when you first got involved with this?" Sarah considered the question for a moment. "I thought I was in over my head and that I needed to be very careful not to drown. And now? Now I know that the water is much deeper than I originally thought, and that the only way to avoid drowning is to learn to swim with the sharks." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a man Benita didn't recognize, tall, well-dressed, with the kind of nervous energy that suggested he was either very excited about something or very scared. He moved through the room greeting people, but Benita noticed that several conversations seemed to die down when he approached. "Who is that?" she asked Sarah quietly. "Park Sang-min. He's one of Junho's lieutenants, responsible for coordinating with our contacts in law enforcement. He bribes cops. Among other things. But lately, Junho has been questioning his loyalty. Why? Because too many operations that Park had advanced knowledge about have been compromised lately." Benita watched Park more carefully, noting the way he kept checking his phone and the fact that he seemed to be avoiding direct conversation with Junho despite being at a family gathering. When he excused himself to take a phone call, stepping out onto the restaurant's private balcony, she made a decision. "I need some air," she told Sarah, who nodded in understanding. Benita made her way to the balcony as casually as possible, timing her arrival to coincide with the end of Park's phone conversation. He was just hanging up when she stepped outside, and the expression on his face when he saw her was one of poorly concealed panic. "Mrs. Kong," he said, bowing slightly. "I hope you're enjoying the evening." "It's been very enlightening," Benita replied, moving to stand beside him at the balcony railing. "Beautiful view from here." "Yes, Mr. Kong always chooses venues with the best perspectives." There was something in his tone that made Benita look at him more carefully. He was sweating despite the cool evening air, and his hands were shaking slightly as he put his phone back in his pocket. "Are you feeling all right?" she asked. "You seem nervous." "Just tired," he replied quickly. "It's been a long week." But as he spoke, Benita noticed something that made her blood run cold. When he had put his phone away, the screen had briefly lit up, showing the contact information for his most recent call. And the name displayed was one that every Korean knew, Detective Kim Jong-soo, the prosecutor who had made his career targeting organized crime. Park had just finished a phone call with one of the most prominent anti-mafia investigators in Seoul. At a gathering of the city's most powerful crime family. Benita forced herself to maintain casual conversation for a few more minutes before excusing herself and returning to the dining room. Her heart was pounding as she processed what she had discovered. She had found the traitor, the person who had been feeding information to law enforcement. But knowing who it was and proving it were two different things. And she suspected that making an accusation without ironclad evidence would be the last mistake she ever made. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of forced conversation and careful observation. Benita watched Park interact with other family members, noting his behavior and looking for additional evidence that might support what she had seen on his phone. When the gathering finally ended and guests began to leave, Junho approached her with a casual air that didn't quite disguise his intense interest in what she might have learned. "Productive evening?" he asked quietly. "Very," Benita replied. "We should talk privately tomorrow." "Something urgent?" "Something that shouldn't wait much longer." Junho's eyes sharpened with interest, but he simply nodded and moved on to saying goodbye to other guests. As Benita and Min Jun drove home, she found herself replaying the evening's events in her mind. She had successfully identified what appeared to be a serious security threat to Junho's organization. But she also knew that delivering this information would make her complicit in whatever consequences Park would face for his betrayal. In the criminal world Junho inhabited, traitors didn't get second chances or opportunities to explain themselves. They simply disappeared, leaving behind nothing but warnings for anyone else who might be considering disloyalty. By tomorrow, Benita would have blood on her hands. The question was whether she could live with that, and whether surviving in this new world was worth the price she would have to pay. Alright everyone, we're really getting into the thick of things now. If you're loving this intense story of betrayal, revenge, and dangerous games, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. And let me know in the comments, do you think Benita should expose Park, or try to find another way? This story is about to take another shocking turn.